All right, so remember it's October, which means October is our goals month, or setting ourselves up for success in 2024, which is next year. So in case you haven't listened to or jumped on the previous trainings, when you really with any business, whether it be real estate, you might own a restaurant, you might have a gym, you might have a multi-level marketing company, right? It doesn't really matter what business, but when we start looking at our goals for the next year, we should start doing that planning in October so that by the end of October, we have our business plan in place and we're ready to roll forward into 2024 to have success. And that also sets us up that at the beginning of November, then we can start executing our plan for 2024 so that we end the year strong and that we begin the year where we need to be. When it comes to something like real estate, we really don't have a 12-month year if we start in January, because as we talked about last week, whatever you have in contract by the end of November is what has the potential to close in December. Things that you put in contract in December probably are not closing until January. So this is our last month, really, like, to ramp it up, to finish the year strong. And by setting ourselves up for success, figuring out our business plan for 2024 and beginning to execute and practice that, it gives us a month of practice in November to work out all the kinks and make sure it's all going to work right, so that by December we're running with it. And by January, we're closing those transactions that we should be closing in order to hit our goal by the end of the month or the end of the year. Our goal is, right, oftentimes with real estate, we have these like, right? We have like a deal and then no deals. We have two deals and then no deals for a couple months. And it makes it really hard to live off that type of income when it's unpredictable and inconsistent. So your goal by putting together a business plan should be that we're going to execute the things that need to be executed on a regular basis so that we can have a consistent stream of business and consistent income. Also, by having a plan and executing that plan, our goal would be that we can be a little pickier in the clients that we choose to work with. If we come across a really difficult buyer or seller that's really just not a lot of fun, that we could just be like, sorry, I need to refer you to somebody else, or actually, I'm not available right now, that we can pick and choose who we get to work with, right? So by having a clear plan, it gives us more freedom in that. So I do have the chat box open. I do have y'all on the screen so I can see most of you. If you have any questions, never hesitate to just unmute yourself and be like, hey, I got a question. Or you can hit the little raise hand button there on your screen, or you can throw it in the chat box. I kind of keep an eye on all three of those. On my screen, so today's lesson is about knowing your numbers and then setting your goal for 2024. So we're going to dive into that. I will share this spreadsheet with you. I've got a couple things I'm still working out formula-wise to make sure it works appropriately, because there's a couple things that are broken because I've changed it a little bit. So, but I'll throw that link to that spreadsheet in the chat box so you can grab it. But last week we talked about your values and your big why. So there's a tabby in here called values, right? And this is where you can actually put those so that you have your values. You could, put your big why on there. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but this GPS, that's usually oftentimes where I tie in the big why is on that GPS or the 411. So we'll dive into that a little bit more in the next couple weeks. But we did talk about your values and defining your values. So this gets you a place to put them where we can keep our business plan, our values, our tracking all together on the same page so that we don't have 20 different things we're looking at, and it keeps it top of mind. So just know that there's a tabby there for that. And then there's a tab called tracking. So knowing your numbers. If we don't know our numbers, it's impossible to track where we've been and to figure out where we're going. Okay, we can put a plan together of where we're going and what we want to accomplish next year, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier if we know what our numbers are. So what are our numbers? How many closings did you have, right? Let's start with the basics. You should know how many closings you have year to date right here and now. Everybody should know that number. If you don't know that number, that's something that you should start tracking immediately. If somebody, how many closings have you had, Amy? That you should be able to respond back with, I've had 12 closings or 14 closings or 3 closings this year. You should know that number, okay? In addition to that, we should know how we got there. How many listing agreements did you get signed? How many listing appointments did you go on, right? If we know how many if we have 10 closings so far this year, and we went on 15 listing appointments to get there, and we had 13 signed listings, then it makes it easier to do our conversion numbers. We know how many appointments we had to go on, right, to get there. So if we went on 15 listing appointments and that got us to 10 closed transactions, then we know that if we take 10 and divide it by 15, which is our conversion rate, we have a 67% conversion rate. With our listing appointments, we know that it's 67%, right? So if I'm trying to hit a number of listings in 2024, I know I have to plan, and I have a spreadsheet that'll help you calculate this, that we need to plan to have more listing appointments than listings and then closings, so that we can make sure we have the number of closings. 67%, in fact, will be successful. And if we had 15 appointments and we signed 13 listing agreements, there's always going to be some fallout. So what's our fallout between signed listing appointment or signed listing agreement and closed listings? So again, if it was, we sat down with 15 people, we signed 13 agreements for 10 closings. So now if we take 10 divided by 13, that tells us we have a 70, oh, you can't see that. Sorry, it's blurry. We have a 77% closure rate on a signed listing agreement. Okay, so these numbers are important. Claudia, I'll reshare the spreadsheet here in just a little bit. I put it in the chat box, but it was probably before you joined. So we need to know our numbers. So you need to know how many closings you've had. Of those closings, how many were buyers and how many were sellers? Okay, important numbers. How many buyers versus how many sellers we have. We always talk about that you should be listing focused. So when we start putting together our plan, oftentimes newer agents find it easier to get buyers and close buyers. Okay, there's more buyers milling about without agents. It's easier to get in contact with people who are potentially buying a house. Okay, but as we grow our business, we want to start splitting that off. So it's about 50-50 buyers to sellers, or oftentimes we end up with kind of a 60-40 ratio, which is 60% buyers to 40% listings. And the reason we talk about being listing focused and really driving towards listings is we should be able to leverage our listings for additional transactions. Okay, every time we put a sign in a yard of a property, we should be able to generate leads from that listings that are going to turn into additional deals. Okay, oftentimes we have more buyers than listings because of the fact that if we have a listing, oftentimes that seller is selling a property and purchasing a property. So that gives us a 50-50 ratio. Sometimes we just sell a property, they move somewhere else, and then we get a referral out of it, or you should be getting the referral out of wherever they're moving to. And then oftentimes from sign calls, working open houses, and all that, we gain buyers. So you should gain, I would say, to make your goal, 3 leads from every listing that you have of potential buyers and sellers. And oftentimes what that ratio ends up looking like is kind of like 1 seller lead to 2 buyers leads. So that's just kind of the general breakdown. But if you track your numbers, you're going to know what that looks like. Okay, so we want to know how many closings we've had, whether they're buyers or sellers. We want to know how many appointments we've sat down on, right? How many buyers did we sit down and meet with and go through a buyer presentation? How many sellers did we go through a listing presentation with? How many signed agreements resulted from those sit downs? How many signed listing agreements and how many signed buyer representation agreements, right? That BRBC, that's becoming more and more important as we progress through real estate in California. Okay, any questions so far? Okay, in addition to knowing that, that's really just closing related, right? It's closings, appointments, signed agreements. What does that work out to? We need to know how we got to the appointments, right? Where did our closings or where did our leads come from? So when we're sitting down with people for that appointment, were they Zillow leads? Were they open house leads? Were they farm leads? Were they people I talked to in Home Depot leads? Were they business to business, right? What kind of lead generation are we doing and where are those leads coming from? Were they social media leads? Right? So we should be tracking where we met those people. Are they sphere of influence? Are they people that were in your database? Okay. There's no wrong answer for that, but we want to know where those leads come from, because if we're spending our time on open houses, farm, and events, and we look at our actual closings and they're all from database and open houses, then that helps us to know where we need to focus our time, energy, and effort, where we're getting success from. It also shows us where we need to tweak things that we're doing, or maybe change things completely. Like we may need to pick a different lead gen source, or we may need to tweak our methods for that lead gen so that it leads to results. Okay, if we're not tracking our numbers, we don't know what that looks like. So we need to know where those leads have come from. Okay. In addition to that, we need to know what activities we're doing for lead gen and what the results of those activities are. So how many open houses did you host in 2023? How many people walked through those open houses? How many leads came from those open houses? And how many of those leads resulted in appointments? How many hours did you spend doing open houses? How many doors did you knock for each open house, right? We need to be tracking our time, energy, and effort. So everything that we do should be tracked. If you're making phone calls as part of your lead gen effort, how many phone calls did you make in 2024 or 2023, right? How many of those resulted in new leads and how many of those resulted in transactions? We should be tracking that. Out of how many dials equal how many people answered phones, and out of how many people actually answered their phones did we create new leads? Okay, same thing with like if you're working a farm, how many houses do you have in your farm? How often are you door knocking or mailing? What activities are you doing? How much time is that taking? And how many conversations are you having? And out of those conversations, how many resulted in signed deals and closed transactions? So we need to be tracking each and every action that we do so that we know what's leading to results and that we can calculate our return on our investment. And remember, it's not always money. It's not always a monetary investment. We also are investing quite a bit of time into things. So there's a lot of activities that take very little money, but that take a good chunk of time. And there's other activities that take a big chunk of money and little amount of time. And we need to track all of those activities to make sure we're getting a good return. Keep in mind that as we put together our business plan for 2024, we want to stay focused in the mindset of prospecting based and marketing enhanced. Oftentimes, prospecting takes less money, but it takes more time, where marketing takes more money, but takes less time. So you're going to spend more time oftentimes than money if you're doing it correctly. All right. Do we have any questions so far as we talk about what you should be tracking? Claudia, I put it back in the chat box for you. Let me open my participant thing too. All right. So on this tracking spreadsheet, you'll see that it tracks seller listing appointments held, and you could change that if you wanted to all appointments held. Listing agreement signed. So again, if you wanted to change that on the top, and once you get this, you want to make a copy of it, and you may want to not make a copy of it until tomorrow. Only because I'm going to continue tweaking it today to make sure all the formulas work and all the dates line up and everything's accurate on it so that you don't have to do that. Because again, there's a couple things that are a little bit broken on this that I'm fixing right now. But when you get it, make a copy of it, save it to your Google Drive, and then this becomes yours. And then you can like name it whatever you want. But and you can keep it listing appointments, or you can change it to all appointments. Same thing with signs, right? Closings. How many closings did you have? And then we're going to track our personal GCI. So this is from both buyers and sellers. And if you're like, Amy, what's GCI? That's your gross commission income. Okay, so that is, if I look at the total commission that Realty One Group Fox earned on this transaction, what was that? That is the gross commission income. Okay, that's before any fees or anything are taken out of that gross commission income. Okay. It's also got this. I'm tweaking some of this because this was originally mine. So I'll be changing this out so that it calculates into your total income. So these extra columns will vanish and go away. So you'll have listing appointments, signed, closings, personal GCI. I may make a special little spreadsheet and add it to this that tracks your lead gen activities. I'll make it kind of like a default blanket one. So again, you may want to wait to make a copy of it. I'll let you know when I'm done with it. And in fact, if you log your attendance to today's class, then Abby will email it out once it's all done. Okay, so when we put that little attendance thing on there, make sure to log your attendance for today, and then I'll have Abby send this to everybody who was on today's class. Okay, so we'll have a lead gen one as well. So this is the tracking. Okay, and then this is set up where all you have to do is each week on Friday, you come in here and you log your numbers. How many listing appointments did I have this week, right? Of those, how many actually signed, right? You just put in the yellow columns. How many closings did I have this week? What was my GCI from those closings, or the gross commission, total income off that? So if I look at the MLS, it was a buyer, it was 2.5%. 2.5% is what, right? So we'll put that in there. I'm just going to put it in there. It will add it all up and keep track of it for you on the year-to-date basis. And notice that I started the dates in November so that we can start tracking this in November leading into 2024. Okay. Then at the end, it'll calculate your total income for you. And then it's also got, you can make commitments to yourself, right? This is really set up as a coaching form that we utilize in our coaching businesses, but you can utilize it on your own. So commitments from last week, results from those commitments, what's happened in this last week, business challenges you're facing, personal challenges you might be facing, right? So we can track this so that we can see, hey, when our numbers were low, we can go back and look at what was going on over the last few weeks. Because keep in mind that real estate has a lead time. Okay, whatever we start doing today, we're going to start seeing the results in 60 to 90 days. So if we get distracted today by stuff that's going on personally, and we're not good at doing our lead gen, we may have really good closings right now, but you watch in 30 to 60 days, we're going to have a lull. And it's because we didn't do the steps that we should have done because we let other stuff distract us and get in the way. Okay, so it's a 60-day lead period. Things that we do today, we see those results in about 60 days in real estate. Okay. What should you focus on to move forward? And how will we know when we've succeeded in moving forward? What does that look like to you, right? So you could track all these things on a weekly basis. This is kind of like, if you don't have a coach, this is kind of like, hey, this is just like mental dump so that I can go back and look. If I'm like, get down here to mid-January and I've got nothing going on, and I come back up here to mid-November and be like, oh yeah, I went on vacation that week and I didn't lead gen. Look at that. Amy was right. There is a 60-day lag. I failed at lead gen and it resulted in a lack of business. Okay. That's when we talk about like that consistent business, putting together a business plan and being consistent in the steps that you should be doing on a daily basis, which really comes down to lead gen, should lead to business. Okay. If it's not leading to business, we need to talk about and tweak your plan so that it does lead to business. And it's not always that you're doing the wrong thing. It may be that we just need to change the approach and tweak it just a little bit, right? But this allows us to track it. Over here, it talks about the database. So you can keep track of active listings, what's pending, and your pipeline. What do you have coming up, right? And just so you know, with Google Sheets, in case you didn't know this, if I had active listings, I might put like 112 Sample Street. If you hit the control and the return button, it goes down a whole nother line inside that cell. It's like magic, right? So then we could put like 123 Love Street, control return. So if we have active listings, this is where we would put those 45 4th Street. Okay, right? We put those all in there. Then you could put, and you may want to adjust that column so that you can see everything that you put in there. Pending by month, this is, hey, what did we have pending this month? What did we move from active to pending? Okay. And this, what we usually do here is we usually take it, you can either do it by week, or you can take and merge all these cells for the month and merge them together and just track it by month. But you can also track it by week. Like, hey, this week, this is what I had active, this is what I had pending, and this is what I had coming soon. The next week they might change out because we might have moved one to pending, or we might have moved one of our pipelines to an active, right? And you may track, these are active buyers and coming soon listings. Obviously, active listings are only listings, but this pending by month might be your buyers and your sellers. Okay, so that's the tracking. And like I said, I'll create a spreadsheet for you for your lead gen tracking as well, that you'll be able to tweak with whatever actions you're doing for that lead gen. Any questions? Would you all find this spreadsheet helpful?
Big time.
Big time. Okay. Does everybody that's on the call today, do you guys know your numbers? Do you know how many closings you had and what your gross commission income was for 2023 year to date? No, I'm going to take silence as no. That's okay. Growth can happen. So It's really helpful if you can go back and look. You can go into actually your Realty One, the One Zone. You can actually look at your production for this year. So if you need to go back and look at those numbers, you can look at those numbers. It has it in there. Let me know if you need help finding that. But you may want to know your numbers this year so that you can move forward, or go back and look through. If you like at least kept track of how many open houses you did, or put it on your calendar when you were hosting an open house, you can go back through your calendar and count up how many open houses, and if you can track how many leads, right? So it may take you some time if you can go back. Otherwise, let's just start clean. We'll start today. Just start tracking now. Okay. It's never too late to start tracking. Okay. So this is the tracking page. This is all about knowing your numbers and the importance of knowing your numbers. We talked about your values already. That's what we talked about last week. I gave you a little spreadsheet here where you can track those values and put them in here. Okay. So that you can keep track of what those look like. The next form that you want to fill out is called our Dream Life form. And it's got 3 sections. It's got personal expenses, business expenses, and it's got our Life by Design expenses, or our Dream Big expenses. Okay. And anywhere there is a yellow column, you want to fill in that information. Okay. Over here, these probably should all be yellow, but these will be different for every person. This is above and beyond what I have to make in order to pay my bills every month. And maybe your real estate doesn't pay your bills. Maybe you have a different method of income that pays your bills. So why are you doing real estate? What do you want to accomplish, right? Because oftentimes we talk about like, hey, what's your 2024 goal? And a lot of people, their answer, especially newer agents, are like, I want to make $100,000. And you're like, why do you want to make $100,000? And they're like, I don't know. That's more money than I've ever made in my entire life. And so that's my goal. Okay. You're only going to get so far with a goal like that. Okay, because what's going to happen is your subconscious isn't going to stay focused on the prize, because I want to make $100,000 because I want to make $100,000 isn't going to get you to that end game. I promise. You might think it's going to, it's not. We need to break that down, right? So if you work from the bottom up on this form, scroll too fast, you have business expenses. And this is, what are you spending per month on these items? Okay. And you may be like, Amy, I'm not spending anything on my business. Well, you probably should be investing in your business. So we probably need to look at that. But you've got things like, and these items are just suggestions. They can be changed, tweaked, added to. You can change these up, right? So what are you spending on marketing? Are you sending out like just listing, just sold flyers? Do you have a website that you pay for, right? What factors in that would count as marketing? What helps you to generate leads? Are you going to run ads on social media? Are you going to host events this next year? What kind of marketing activities are you going to be? And what's your monthly budget going to look like? Okay, so you're going to put a number in for that. If you've got like assistants or admins or whatnot, that's where salaries, benefits, payroll, taxes, and fees might come in. How much money are you going to spend specifically on lead generation versus marketing? Occupancy would be like if you pay a desk rent or for an office, you would put that in there. Technology and communications, right? Things like your phone, technology, if you've got like a CRM that you pay for, if you pay for like a text service, right? Things like that. Education and coaching would fall in the next line. Supplies, your auto, your car, if you have a car payment, and your insurance that you use for business. Equipment and furnishings, right? Do I need to buy a new computer, a new phone? Do I need to get a new office desk? What does that look like? Equipment and furnishings, there's extra lines down there. You're going to fill in those numbers. So let's say that I'm just going to put $1,000. And just so you know, if you are newer and you're like, man, I don't need a lot of that, and I've got $200 in my business expenses monthly, I'm going to ask you to bump that number to $1,000. $1,000 in expenses monthly for your business. I'm just going to ask you to budget it in there so that it's budgeted as a line item. Okay, if you're over $1,000, that's fine. Just keep whatever you've got. But if you've got some line items on here like marketing or lead gen, or maybe technology or even education that's at zero, you may want to just give yourself a budget in that area so that when we factor in what our numbers are for the year, what our goal is, that those numbers are factored in there. Your education and coaching would be things like, are you going to go to Summit? Right? What is that going to cost? Are you going to attend some classes that you may have to pay for? Things like that would fall under education or coaching. Okay, any questions there on your business expenses? Okay, so again, minimum business expenses should be $1,000 a month when you figure out your budget. It may be more. If you've got your business rolling pretty good, you're probably going to be higher. Now, keep in mind, I talked about, I think it was last week, Hold on, I've got stickies everywhere. The MREA book, the Millionaire Real Estate Agent book. It's not going to come into focus here. No. Anyways, there you go. Millionaire Real Estate Agent book. I've got the leadership edition, which has tabbies. But if you look in here, there is a budget model. And it talks about like what you should be spending on a monthly basis on your business in order to generate business, right? So it's actually got a little diagram of the business model that talks about that, hey, if you are at a gross commission income of 180,000 or less, you should be spending 10% on lead generation, right? So 10% of your income should go back into lead generation, right? Occupancy, right? So all this, so it kind of breaks it all down for you. So this is a great guideline, highlighted. I will try to find, I have a version of this. I actually have a newer updated version of this. I'll try to find it and share it with you guys as well, as long as you log your attendance. I'll send that out with the spreadsheet once it's done, because I know I have it somewhere. But it breaks down the budget of what you should be spending in each area. Okay. So that's your budget. So again, minimum $1,000 a month budget. You might be spending more, and that's totally okay to be spending more as long as you got income coming in. The next section is your personal expenses. If your real estate income covers your personal expenses, or maybe you're trying to get out of a job and that covers your personal expenses, and we'd like to do real estate full time, or maybe a spouse is working another job and you'd like to get your spouse out of their regular job, and so that's going to cover your monthly expenses, then you would put it in here. If at no point is real estate going to help cover your personal expenses, you can just leave this one blank. Okay, but these are things like groceries, household items, utilities, mortgage, rent, health insurance, right? All those things, kids' activities, all those things that you pay for on a monthly basis would go in here. Dining out, date nights, whatever that might be. Okay, and you're going to put in the budget monthly so that it'll calculate out for you what the year is. Keep in mind that this business expense, notice down here at the bottom, we have monthly total, and then we have the grand total for the year, and there's no line for taxes there, because everything that we buy for our business is a tax write-off. Check with your tax person, but that's the general rule of thumb. Most things that we spend money on for business is a tax write-off. So we don't have to factor in taxes to this number. Versus when we look at personal income, like if we want things to cover personal expenses, right? If part of my real estate income is going to cover my rent or my mortgage, then I'm going to pay for that with post-tax dollars. Okay. It says pre-tax here only because it's before tax is calculated. So this will automatically calculate the total that you're going to spend here on a monthly basis. It's going to add taxes to that. So if you notice, like here, I've got $1,000 in my expenses, and then my monthly total with tax is right here. It adds those in, and then it's going to calculate that out and figure that what it is on an annual basis. If you're like, Amy, where's it pulling that tax number? I'll show you here in a minute. Okay, so you're going to plug in your personal expenses there. Then we're going to come up to the top and we're going to say, hey, yes, Anastasia's totally not shopping while I'm talking, but she did mention that Amazon Prime Deals has the book for somewhere between $19 and $28. If you want the tabbed version, you have to get it at the Red Store. If you want that link, I'll share it with you later because I have to look it up. But the tabbed version, it's hard to get a hold of. Usually it's just the regular book version. Okay, this next section is big, right? So outside of my business expenses and outside of the stuff that I have to do for my family on a monthly basis to pay our bills, what else do we want to do this year that real estate is going to fund for us? What are our goals? Do you have debt, right? Is there debt that you want to pay off? Do you want to pay off all your debt this next year? Do you want to pay off a portion of that? Do you have a goal that in the next 5 years, you're going to be debt free? What's your total debt divided by 5? Let's put that number in here. Maybe it's $20,000. Maybe you want a new kitchen. So home improvements, I would go further and be like, home improvements is new kitchen. Or maybe let's make it more exciting. I want a backyard remodel, right? And maybe that's going to be $50,000. And then maybe we also want to go on vacation. Is this going to be like a family vacation? Is it going to be just me and my husband vacation? Is it going to be a friend's vacation? We may want to break it down differently. Maybe we want family vacation and we're going to put like 5,000 there. And you're going to be like, man, I want to go on just like a fun vacation with my friends. Vacation, maybe friends. and maybe we need like 3,000 there, right? We can break it down and be specific. Okay, so think of the things that you want to accomplish this year and what does that look like? If we were putting together a dream board for you, what would go on that dream board? And it may be something as simple as like one year when I first got started, my dream was like, I just want a dishwasher. Our house didn't have a dishwasher and I just wanted a dishwasher. That was on my dream board. It wasn't like a multi-$1,000 item. It was literally like, I actually ended up getting one off Facebook Marketplace for like $100. It was a portable dishwasher that I could stash into my closet because we didn't have a space for it in the kitchen. So, right. So it doesn't have to be like this big gargantuan, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It may be something small. It may be like, man, you know what? I would really like a dog. And I haven't had money to be able to afford a dog because I know that dogs come with food bills and vet bills, and I got to get them spayed or neutered, and I've got to like make sure I can care for them. So maybe I just want a dog. So I figure it like on an annual basis, it's going to cost me $2,500 to own a dog. I want to make sure I've got money set aside. So if something happened to that dog, I could take him to the vet before I get that dog. Or maybe the dog itself, maybe you're like, man, maybe I don't want a pound dog. Maybe I want a purebred French bulldog. And that French bulldog itself is going to cost you $2,500. Maybe you got the money on a monthly basis to pay for the vet bills and the expenses, but man, I'd like to save up for that French bulldog. That's an extra expense for our family. And that's been my dream dog. And I would really like that. Put it on there, right? It's okay to do that. Maybe you want like a Maine Coon cat. Those are freaking expensive cats. We got a Maine Coon breeder up here. They're really pretty cats. They got lots of fur though. I can't imagine having a long-haired cat inside my house. But maybe you want one. And those cats range between like $2,000 to $3,000 a pop, right? So maybe you want to put it on there. So this is your dream big. This is above and beyond like surviving. What do I want? What does thriving look like to me? Okay, does anybody have questions about that? We have personal expenses, business expenses, and our thriving. Here, we'll put that up here. Thrive. Okay. Now, down here, we're going to factor into our tax rate. So see this yellow bubble down here at the bottom of this first box? That's your tax rate. Average tax rate that you should factor in is probably 25 to 30%. Hopefully you've got a really good tax guru and financial planner that can show you all the loopholes and things that you can do to help reduce that down so that your tax rate's a lot lower. I think our effective tax rate this year was like 5%. Okay, so you can get that down. But when we budget, we're going to budget like average 25 to 30% usually. Or if you don't know what your tax rate usually is, factor in that. Okay. Now, in addition to this, I've got this up here. You'll see these extra columns. It talks about retirement, team split, and tithe. So just some other things to factor in. If you are on a team and you're going to be paying out money to a team, right? Maybe you only collect 90% of your income, or maybe you pay 40% to your team leader. Then you may want to factor that in here as well. This is a good way. This is why I say added to tax rate. Maybe we follow Dave Ramsey, Financial Peace University, which talks about setting aside 15% of your income into retirement accounts or for retirement savings. So I've got that on here. And then you may like tithe or give to charities. And so if there's anything that's percentage based, that's not like a dollar amount per month, then what I do, just so you know, is I add that to my tax rate. Okay, it's going to cause you to be a little off, but it'll work. So, right. So if my tax rate's normally like 25%, and then I'm going to set aside 15% for retirement, now I'm at 40%. And then if I also do a tithe, now I'm at 50%. So I may come down here and put 50% for my tax rate, but I know that my tax rate's really 25%. And I'm just factoring in that I want to make sure it's budgeted, that I'm going to tithe, and that I'm going to give to charity, and that I'm going to set money aside for retirement. Okay. So that's where I kind of stick that, because it's not necessarily, it has to do with how much money I make, not necessarily a flat rate per month. Okay, does that make sense to everybody? Thumbs up, thumbs down. Yes, maybe. So smiley face.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, Anastasia says. Okay. So notice it's going to total all this right here. It's going to add back in. It's going to buffer it for those taxes. Thank you for your thumbs up, Claudia. Right. So we went from the numbers here totaled 80,500. It added in a 50% tax rate. So it bumped it to 161,000. So for me to thrive, I would need 161,000 extra dollars in my GCI. And then it's going to grand total this. Oh, it actually doesn't have to do that. This is the grand total. See, some of these things are broken. There we go. Okay. So that's your grand total. So in order to thrive, that's what it would have to be. Then it's going to come over here to, so see, we just fill in the yellow columns. If you need to fill in the monthly, you're welcome to fill in the monthly as well, but otherwise it's kind of figured out by a year. You fill in your tax rate, and then we come over here and we're going to figure out what's our average gross commission. Okay, so if you've had closings, if you're not brand new to the business, if you had closings this last year, you can look back over your previous business, right? How many closings did I have? What was my gross commission? Remember, your gross commission is going to be before anything is taken out of it, before Realty One Group takes their split, before you pay your transaction coordinator, before anything is paid out. What was my gross commission? And then you're going to take that total gross commission and total number of transactions, and you're going to divide your total commission by the total number of transactions. That's going to give you your average gross commission. Okay, if you don't know what your average gross commission is, or you have not had any closings yet because you're a new agent or whatnot, then you can just go off, well, what is my average sales price? So let's say the average sales price, I like to be really conservative on this. So I like to say, hey, my average sales price, like $550,000. And then average commission on a buyer side transaction is usually 2.5%. So if I took 550,000 times 2.5%, that's 13,750. Okay. Now, the other thing that we're working with too, just so you know, I may make one adjustment here, and here's what I may adjust for on my average gross commission. Because we're with Realty One Group and not on a percentage from our company. So if you're on a cap system, let's say you're working with somebody else, you're with a cap system, there's a place for that. We'll put that in a minute. I'll show you where to put that. Or it's a percentage-based system. We can factor that in a little bit differently. But at Realty One, right, we have a transaction fee per transaction. Who knows what the transaction fee is for a purchase of $550,000? Does anybody have that number for me?
35%.
It's 550,000 is what Claudia put in the thing, right? So if we have a purchase of 550, Realty One gets 550,000. Sorry, $550, not 550,000. Okay. In addition to that, you're probably going to pay a transaction coordinator fee. So let's say, what's Melina charge there in the office for transaction coordination? $350. All right. So we've got perfect. $550 in transaction fee and $350 for our average transaction at $550,000. We're going to pay $900 in fees per transaction. So you may want to take 13,750 minus 900, which would be 12,850, and put that number in here. That way, those things that we're going to pay every single transaction have been taken out of that average gross commission so that our numbers are accurate. Okay. Does that make sense to everybody why I did that? If you were on like a cap system or something where it maxed at a certain amount, or you knew you were going to close enough transactions to do that, then down here under this section, under closings, we would have cost of sales. And that's where that number would go there under cost of sales. So you'd put like whatever the total is for the year there. It's not going to work quite on this spreadsheet. So there's actually a different place to put that. So don't put it on the spreadsheet, but that's what I would do here under the average gross with Realty One. I would subtract out the, based on whatever I'm using as my average sales price to get to my average commission. So sales price, if you have closings, we just take the total closings, we add them all together with the sales price. We divide that by the number of closings. That gives us our average sales price to figure out what that would be. And then you can figure out, you could subtract out of your average gross commission what that transaction fee would be for that. And then also your transaction coordination fee. Okay, it's going to take it. See this first line item here is personal and business survival from the left side. So it's taking this number here is adding up down here, these bottom. It's adding up this $12,000 and this $24,000. okay, to get that 36. So it's automatically calculating that number right here. And it's saying, hey, based on this average gross commission, in order to just get by, in order to survive, we have to close 3 transactions this year. Okay. Then it's saying, hey, Life by Design, or this was our Thrive box over here. Here's what we needed, right? It's pulling this number directly from right here, pulling it over here. And it's saying, hey, based on the average commission that you said, you would need 13 transactions in order to have a gross commission to match that 161,000. Okay. And then it totals it all together. 161 plus 36,000 is 197,000. And it adds 13 plus 3, which is 16. This one actually takes, and it's somewhere in here, there's a percentage. So that's why it looks like it should be 16, but it's really 15 because this is probably like 12 point something and this is 2 point something. So it's adding it up for a total of 15. So if you're like, Amy, the math is wrong, that's why it doesn't look like it's right. Okay. So that is to figure out your blanket, like, here's what I need in order to thrive. And here's the number of closings that equals to. Okay. Anybody have questions about this spreadsheet, how to fill it out? It's okay to dream big. Okay. When you put stuff on your Thrive, it's hard to do it first, but you'll get there. Okay. The next form that you're then going to go to is called the economic model. And this comes straight out of the MREA book. Just so you know, we're going to move from our dream life form. This is our, like, put it all down on paper. This should take you longer than 10 minutes unless you're already really good at budgeting and you already know what all your expenses are for this last year business wise. Remember, we want to factor in, like, you're probably going to be higher than 1,000 because your association dues are like $750 all by themselves. And then you've got Barry's fees of 125 or 130 quarter. You've got your Supra fees, like all that factors into those business expenses. So just keep that in mind. You're probably really closer. That's why I said $1,000 a month, because you've got fees that you're not even thinking of. I promise. Okay. Also, you've got like the monthly office fee. If you want to get rid of that, refer people to the office, other agents, you can get rid of that fee. Okay. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the economic model. So this is our next form. So we're only going to adjust the numbers in yellow. All fields in gray will auto-populate each time the yellow columns are shifted as the formulas are programmed in already. According to the MREA, it's page 183. We're always going to round up, so we don't need like pennies and dimes and stuff, okay? Our gross commission goal. This actually pulls over from the other form. So you don't even have to populate that one because we're going to do this one first. Remember, we had 197,000 was our goal. It's going to pull that over. Your cost of sales, this is if you had like a cap type system where you paid a certain amount of money to your brokerage. And then after you paid that much, you were not going to pay anymore. You would factor that in here. We factored in the transaction fee into our average commission. So it's probably going to be 0 if you work at Realty One Group. Okay. The next one is from knowing your numbers, right? What is your ratio of sellers to buyers? If we know our numbers for this past year, we can plug in our actual numbers here. If you don't know what your numbers are, if you're a newer agent, I would probably say that you're probably, let's estimate that we're going to be 20%, 80%. And if we fill in the top one for sellers, it's going to auto-populate the buyer's number, the buyer's ratio. It's calculated out, right? So if I change this to 25%, it automatically updates it to 75%. Okay. So what is your ratio of sellers to buyers? How many seller transactions to how many buyer transactions, right? Ultimately, your goal is to kind of get to a 50-50 mix. Okay. Listings taken to listings sold. So this was that how many listing agreements did we have signed? And how many of those actually closed? There's always going to be some fallout. Something happens, a seller changes their mind. We've got a lot of people in our office right now that actually can't even get a hold of sellers. So weird times, people, weird times, right? So listings taken, that's signed listing agreements to number of listings sold. If you have numbers from this past year, you can utilize those numbers if you've been tracking. If you haven't been tracking, I recommend going with like 75%. It's a nice safe number. It may be closer to like 80 or 90%, right? So you can tweak that a little bit. Somewhere between like, I'd say 75 and 85% is probably where you're going to guesstimate if you don't know your current numbers. Here we have listing appointments gone on to listings taken, right? So that's how many listing appointments did we show up for and how many listing agreements did we get signed? Again, if we're tracking our numbers and we know it makes it really easy, we just divide it one by the other. Usually it's the smaller number by the bigger number. Listings taken to total listing appointments, that would give you your ratio there. If you don't know what it is, I would recommend going with somewhere between 60 and 75%. Okay, part of it also depends how much lead generation you're doing and how many cold listing appointments you're sitting down on versus sphere of influence. Sphere of influence listings are usually going to be a lot higher than for listings taken than if you've got a lot of cold leads or people you don't know. Okay, our next one is buyers taken to buyers sold. So that's how many buyer representation agreements are signed that equal closed transactions. Okay, this is probably going to be a little lower than your seller ratio because buyers are a lot more wishy-washy. Rates go up, they fall out, they're harder to get commitment from, right? Whatever that is, I would probably keep it somewhere around 75% if you don't know what that ratio is. Buyer appointment gone on to buyer signed. This might actually be higher percentage-wise than your buyers taken to buyers sold. Okay, so this might actually be closer. Like if you're like, if I sit down with a buyer, they're going to sign that buyer representation agreement, like done deal, 90%. But then once they sign it, it may be there's a higher fallout number of those signed to those closed. That's okay. That's probably normal. Okay, here's where we have our average sales price for sellers and our average sales price for buyers. We're going to break that down differently. You may have a lot of Zillow buyers that are at a much lower price range versus our sellers that are all like database generated leads that might be a higher price point. Who knows? If you have your numbers from this year, break it down, figure it out, and put in actual numbers. If you don't have actual numbers from this year, I would go with 550,000. It's a safe number, and I would use that both for sellers and buyers. But it does break it down that you could do it separately. It also, on line 9, it gives you the option to break down your average commission for sellers versus buyers. How much do you make on average, percentage-wise, for your buyers? Oftentimes, if you're not negotiating up, it's usually 2.5%. Your average commission for buyers, that's what's usually offered in the MLS, is 2.5%. Doesn't mean that's what yours is. There's different methods and things that you could be increasing it, or you may be like, I give away so much money that mine is lower. Who knows? Okay, and then sellers, same thing. Like your seller commission might be higher than your buyer commission. Okay, any questions on that top section?
No, ma'am.
All right, fabulous. It's going to take down and do a little math for you here. It's going to take your net income, which is really your total gross income, which we pulled over from the top of this, which pulled over from the other spreadsheet, our Dream Life form. It's going to subtract out your cost of sale, which is pulling from the number above, and your expenses, which is pulling from the Dream Life form. And then it's going to give you your net income. Okay, this number right here may be a little different than what was on the Dream Life form. Okay, this was kind of a blanket number here. And remember that we took out some stuff over here. Okay, because we took out we factored in the average commission minus the transaction fee and minus the transaction coordination fee. So this one might spit out different numbers than this other form is. This one's ultimately, this economic form is going to be the most accurate. Okay. All right. Percentage of sellers. So it's going to pull this, right? So now it's going to break down like, hey, if we said we needed gross income of 197,000, what does that breakdown look like? And it's going to break it down by buyers and sellers. So for sellers, it's saying our percent sellers is 25%. It's pulling that, remember, from this grid up here. We put that we were going to have sellers to buyers of 25%. It's going to say, hey, what does that mean for sellers? Of your total gross income that you need, your 197,000, 49,250 of that's going to come from listings. At an average commission rate at 3%, that means our sold volume in order to reach this commission needs to be $1.6 million in sold listings with an average sales price of $550,000. It's pulling this from the top. That means you need to close 3 total listings. Okay, and again, it's calculating this all for you. We're trying to make it easy. For 3 closed listings with an 80% conversion rate from signed listing agreement to closed, we need to sign 4 total listing agreements this year. Okay. And then if it's a 75% for everybody that I sit down with to get a signed listing agreement, it's a 75% conversion rate. I need to sit down with 5 people in order to get 4 agreements signed in order to have 3 closed listings this year. Okay, it's going to do the same thing for buyers. 75% of our gross commission income is going to come from buyers. So 147,750 is going to come from buyers. Our average commission rate's 2.5%. That means we need to close about $6 million in buyer transactions with an average sales price of $550,000. That means we need to close 11 buyers. So we need to close 11 buyers and 3 sellers for a total of 14 transactions. Our conversion rate to sold is 75%, which means we need to have 14 signed buyer broker agreements to get 11 closings. And we need to sit down with 16 people in order to get 14 signed agreements to get 11 closings. Does this make sense to everybody? Yes? Okay. If we're tracking our lead generation efforts, then this makes it really easy to go back and say, okay, I need 3 listings. Where did my listings come from this year? Is that where my listings are going to come from next year? Like what sources? Were they all sphere of influence? Were they open houses? Were they door knocking? Great. How many doors did I knock in order to get that appointment with that seller? Right? Oh, I had to knock for every 473 houses I knocked, I got 1 appointment. Right? Now I know how many doors I need to knock in order to get those 3 closings, or how many activities I need to do, how many open houses I need to sit at in order to get that many. So if we're tracking our numbers, then it makes it really easy to break this down. So if we need 11 total buyers for the year sold, we need 16 appointments. That's like 2 appointments a month, right? Can we get 2 appointments with buyers per month? Does that make it seem more doable? Yes, no, maybe so. Okay. This number is going to tweak a little. Absolutely. Anastasia says absolutely. Okay. So it'll break it down for us, and it's going to take these numbers automatically. It'll make it so it feeds it into this tracking form for you, and it'll track your total goal number of appointments per year, right? It'll break that down into what that is per month. And then it's going to break it down to what you need to do on a weekly basis. Okay. And then we're just going to track those numbers each Friday. You're going to come open this as part of your end of the day activities every Friday. You can change that day if you want to. You're just going to come in here and plug in your numbers. Now, keep in mind that you're going to plug your numbers each week and at the end of the month. Okay. We want to close out the month so that we know where we're at. Okay. And then it's going to automatically calculate for you. Here's your goal. Here's where we're at. Your goal for this month was 2. We're at 5. The goal for the year is 21. And we're at 5 listing appointments. So we're at 24% by the end of November. Okay. So it's going to track all that for you. It's going to be magical. So you're going to fill out your dream life form. Then you're going to fill out the economic model. And then it's going to automatically plug it into the tracking so that you can track it on a weekly basis. And again, I'm also going to create for you a lead generation tracking form so that you can track those activities. You'll have to tweak it just a little bit depending on what lead generation activities you're doing so that you can do that. And I may make 3 of them because you should have 3 legs of lead gen outside of sphere of influence and your leads from listings. Questions, thoughts? Was this helpful? Okay, next. Oh, go ahead, Claudia.
I was just going to say yes. Thank you. Yes. Perfect. I'm agreeing with Anastasia.
Perfect. All right. So next week, we don't have class tomorrow because it's the team meeting, and there is a business planning clinic in the morning sponsored by Cyberbacker. If you want to jump on that, it's going to make you miss the Realty One group meeting. So Ed said I could promote it, but you're going to have to weigh your options there because it runs from 9 to 1 because it's 12 to 4 Eastern time. So it's $20, 4 hours of business planning. They'll show you how to walk through this whole process together of how to set up your business plan. But we're also going to be doing that on these sessions. So you can always jump in on that as well. So next week, Thursday, we have forms. Next week on Tuesday, we have building a business plan for success. So your goal between this week and next week is to take this spreadsheet and plug in these numbers and know what your goal is for next year. And then we'll talk about how to break those numbers down next week and how to put them into a business plan. Okay. And then we're going to break it down even further on Wednesday. So we're going to take and put together a business plan. Then we're going to talk about on Wednesday how to plan the year out into a 12-week year and what that looks like and what I mean by that. Then the next week, we're going to show you how to break it down further into weekly activities with the 411. And then we'll talk about how to time block to eliminate the chaos on the 25th. That's going to basically wrap up our month of business planning. So make sure you're tuning in and watching that or catch the replay. But that's kind of what we have coming up, how we're going to take this and just piece it together step by step is our goal. Make sure you log your attendance. The link is in the chat box to log your attendance. Once I get the spreadsheet cleaned up today and finished, then I will have Abby email it out to everybody. Both this, I'll also pull the copy of the MREA budget model for you so you can see what that looks like depending on where your GCI is at. And it varies depending on teams because at a certain GCI, you should start adding to your team, which is a whole nother topic we can talk about in the future. So we'll do that. So make sure you log that attendance and then I'll get this to everybody. As always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out. And thanks for joining me today.